Good evening and welcome to Legal Tech Live, episode 79. I'm here with a returning guest, Dan Rubins of LegalRobot. LegalRobot is who I interviewed. I actually interviewed Dan at LegalRobot it's been over 4 years now. It's been over 4 years that I've known of Dan, that I've enjoyed his tweets, that I've been following LegalRobot, and he's returning in part two to share updates of LegalRobot. So Dan, a little bit about Dan Rubins. He is the solution principal at Slalom Build. He's the executive director of LegalTech Foundation, co-founder of LegalRobot. He's an appointee to the California Bar Access Through Innovation of Legal Services Task Force. He's an advocate for ethical AI and responsible use of technology. He's a frequent speaker for the Association of Computing Machinery, American Bar Association, National Press Club, SAP, Microsoft, as well as academic and industry conferences. He's a mentor at Founder Institute and The Last Mile, formerly at McKesson, Wells Fargo, and UC Davis. Welcome back, Dan. Thank you for doing this. I appreciate you joining us for pandemic podcasting, is what I guess we'll refer to it as. And let me give people a little feedback on LegalRobot, or a little taste of what LegalRobot does, and then you can dive into that and talk about many of the things that have happened in the last 4.5 years or so. So on their What We Do page, LegalRobot says, at LegalRobot, we set our sights on an ambitious goal: help anyone, anywhere understand legal language. With recent advances in machine learning and our awesome team, we believe we can solve some of the biggest problems in business and access to justice. Great mission, but what does LegalRobot do? What services do you guys provide?
So I think kind of like it feels like everyone else in legal tech, we started out doing contract analytics because that's just, I don't know, that feels like the default mission right now in legal AI is you do contract analytics. They're easy to get a hold of. You don't have to consume a whole bunch of case law, and you can get a pretty good start on working with that kind of stuff. So we started out in that space and really kind of pivoted more into the sort of the people law sector, where we're really trying to help people understand legal language. And what that means is we're compressing legal language into plain English using machine learning. So that's sort of one domain of the business right now. The other domain is something that's actually, I guess, probably illegal in most states, which is contract drafting via algorithm. So we've got some things that we're sort of holding in reserve because it's, they could send me to jail theoretically if we launched those products, which is just, it's bizarre. And then that kind of ties into my work on the ATILS task force. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about that work is because, there's just so much opportunity out there to do so much good in the world. Not even looking at it from a business perspective, but just trying to make a dent in the access to justice crisis. We can do so much with technology, and we are legally prevented from even, playing around in that space at all. There's no place for it right now. There's no legal model for it.
So you probably took the position or the opportunity to join Access, the California Bar's task force on access through innovation of legal services. It probably looked like a good opportunity for you from a legal technology standpoint to, okay, well, let's see what we can do to kind of push the regulatory structure forward so that we can actually, companies like mine can provide a service that we think anybody should be able to provide.
Yeah, well, and so one of the things that I did when I think this was even before we incorporated LegalRobot, but I sent a letter to the state bar, basically asking for guidance, like, hey, we know we want to do something here that's a little on the edge. We want to push the boundary, but we don't want to step over the line. Can you give us some guidance? And we got this weird response back, like, no, I don't know, go find a lawyer. Like, and so there was just no regulatory guidance.
Right.
And we're like, okay, well, we don't want to step over that line, but there should be something out there that's telling founders like me, how close can we get to that line without really creating something that's going to get us into legal jeopardy. Because at this point, we have people steering so clear of that line that they're just, they're not innovating. And that, so they'll go off and they'll build something for corporate law, or they'll go build something for, personal injury or bankruptcy. And like, that's great. There's certainly a need in those areas, but like, it's not serving the bulk of the justice gap. And that's
Right.
really sort of frustrating that the regulators that are supposed to be helping people are ultimately getting in the way.
Very, very fair analysis. Definitely something that I've seen here. In fact, we've discussed it many times on the show that one of the most profitable ways to be in legal tech is to sell something to big law, or to, that if you're looking for it's not selling to the solo and small practices, it's find something and sell it to the large law firms. That's your best way to find a really good, financially stable business. And that's unfortunate because that leaves so many underrepresented parties from getting services that they need. And really what we all believe in is that's a huge market that we could monetize, and we wouldn't necessarily need to sell to big law in order for it to be successful. So we've experienced that. So you started LegalRobot, you started with the contract automation, contract analytics, and where have you progressed from there?
Yeah, so we've done a handful of different things in there. We had this DMCA like filing bot that would learn. It was actually kind of a cool solution from the technical side, but it didn't really result in any significant revenue. But it would go out and we would teach it how to navigate a regulatory website. And in this case, it was registering your designated, I forget what the name is, but designated agent or something for DMCA to be in their safe harbor. And it was fine. It was a pretty simple thing. No one really used it, which was sort of a bummer, but it was a really interesting product to build because we got to teach an algorithm how to navigate a website. And it turns out that was actually the really useful part of that. And since then, we've used that to navigate county and state websites, sort of searching for contracts that are of interest to investigative journalists. And that's part of this whole work that we did with the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation.
Tell us about, because not everybody, you and I chatted a little bit beforehand, but not everybody, and we thank you. I want to thank, we aren't getting, Facebook is not pandemically sophisticated, so we're not able to stream there. So folks are coming over here. We've got Adam Kerpelman, Ashley Pepitone, Colin Levy, Diego Alcala, Douglas Laughlin, and Johan is here as well. So thank you all. And if you got questions for Dan, let them rip. So we're talking legal tech tonight. So yeah, tell us about this, John. What is the foundation that you're doing some work with?
So it's the Knight Foundation in collaboration with the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard and the MIT Media Lab as part of this AI ethics initiative. And basically, they decided to reserve a chunk of money and sort of figure out how AI and ethics are going to collide in some really key industries like journalism. So the
Hmm.
Knight Foundation came from, the Knight Ridder fortune. So they have a huge interest in journalism naturally. And what we came up with was essentially taking our technology that analyzes contracts and extracts things out of contracts. Again, not that novel in today's legal tech market, but we were sort of there at the earlier end of that.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you'd really been doing that almost 5 years ago when we interviewed you.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
so when I get the new folks pitching me as to want to be on the show and they're doing this, and I'm thinking to myself, I've done enough of these interviews. I need to offer something new. You were there for almost 5 years ago when we interviewed you.
yeah. Well, and to all those companies, I think they need to differentiate themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what we had figured out. Kira was doing that kind of stuff, and they kind of became the 800-pound gorilla, and they got a whole ton of VC funding, and good for them.
Yeah.
Seriously, they've done great there. There are a bunch of other companies in that space, but we kind of looked at this and we were like, okay, we want to do some good in the world, so we applied for this grant with the AI Ethics Initiative and took our technology, went out and found a whole ton of contracts. I mean, bigger than any public data set of contracts that's currently available. Um, Millions and millions and millions and millions of contracts from all across public agencies, all throughout the U.S. And then we started doing all of our extraction on them. Started sort of cross-linking all of the names and addresses and insurance agents and whatnot. And what's really interesting when you build essentially a knowledge graph of all of those different connections, you can find very valuable information between those. So commercially, you can tell a city or a county or something like that, hey, those guys over there, they're getting this deal from Verizon. You might want to negotiate this on your next renewal. So
Ah,
that's valuable commercially to them.
right.
We weren't monetizing it at all, but theoretically we could sell that, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, but our real interest was finding essentially almost like circles in the graph, fraud rings, for example, in the graph, where you have a city council member that has an LLC registered at their home address, and that LLC maybe has a business in front of the city or something.
Right.
Um, and I say that, but it actually is happening. That happened in San Francisco. There was a federal indictment no more than 2 months ago. The head of public works was, funneling money and doing side deals and all kinds of shady stuff. And so that's what we're trying to do at scale, and then pass those tips on to local journalists for free. Give them the documents. Here's the backup. Here's a story. Go just run with it. And add the human element to that story, and go put some people in jail.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say for free. And I think, your first big Wall Street Journal cover, after that, you might get journalists, on the monthly subscription digging through that information. Is there, I
Yes,
mean, I feel like it would be a shame for you not, for yourself not to monetize something like that.
it would. Yeah, it would. But we did make a commitment. And Knight didn't even ask for this, but we made a commitment to always provide this for free to
Gotcha.
investigative journalists.
Okay.
And we also made a commitment to provide the data set for free to academics and other folks that want to use this, as well as legal tech companies, so that they can use it to get started with whatever solution they want. Because this was something that was really hard for us. Initially, it was, we couldn't find a data set
Mhm.
for contract analytics. There are some that are out there now, but it was basically it was looking at Edgar, and that was about it.
Right.
So rather than sort of pulling the ladder up behind us, we want to make sure that it's still there for the folks that come up through this sort of journey that we've had over the last 5 years.
Well, that is good of you because you've seen legal tech. You've had this experience of having a sustainable business for 5 years now. And was it 2015 that you guys incorporated LegalRobot?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. So
September 2015. Yeah,
yeah, and not long after that, you were on our show because it was one of our earliest shows.
I
It
think that
was
was in October. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. You were brand new when you joined, so
Mhm.
that was one of our earliest shows. And for those watching and listening now, one of the reasons every time I see Dan, I've said you got to come back on because uh, because I like him, and you're getting his very reserved personality. He's very reserved in person, but his tweets can sometimes cut a little bit, and I appreciate that. I enjoy
Yeah,
that a great
I
deal.
run my mouth on Twitter sometimes. Maybe a little too much, but yeah.
Yeah, I enjoy that a great deal. So he's endeared himself to me that way. But we had lost the content when we were transferring between multiple different platforms back when social video was more of a thing. And so now that we're on Zoom, we don't have that problem nearly as much. Um, anyway, that's just a little background there. Yeah, you were probably within the first 5 episodes of the show, actually, and so a lot's changed since then. But you've seen a lot of the changes in the legal technology field or
I've
sector
seen
or
some shit,
space.
man.
You've seen some shit. You have some huge investments that went nowhere. Some huge investments that were great for some, and you've built a sustainable business or an ongoing business, but you've also had to adapt and move out beyond the business in some form. So what do you think, what's the best way, because I do want to get back to the monetization of your public records thing, but what would be like a couple of your top two things that you would give as advice to legal tech founders who are much newer to it than you are?
Um,
Maybe
find
one
your revenue.
positive and one negative.
Yeah, I would say find your revenue as fast as you can. Um, we kind of screwed around for a while, and we were sort of on the VC train, and we're like, okay, well, we want to build something, and so we were thinking we were going to get some VC funding, and we didn't iterate fast enough at first, and so we just didn't get to revenue at the speed we wanted, which was, yeah, that was probably a big mistake,
Okay.
and we ended up not going the whole VC route. I would say that's, especially in legal tech, that's something to really consider. We saw what happened with Atrium. They took 75 million and imploded. Now they are returning some of that to investors, I suppose, but it's not going to be all of it.
No, it won't be all of it. Not if you had 200 employees at one point, right?
Yeah,
You're going to
yeah,
burn through $75 million pretty fast if you got 200 employees and most of them working in the Bay Area.
yeah.
So, yeah, we see those types of implosions, and it not necessarily they tried something that didn't work, but I don't want to beat up any founders for anything that they do because it
No,
is
they
in
they
this
took an
space it's
awesome swing at
difficult.
that.
Yep.
Yeah, they took a great swing at that. But it's, when people see a lot of legal tech startups taking VC money, that becomes sort of the norm, and that really doesn't have to be the only way. It's hard either way. I mean, if you take VC money, you are expected to hit a lot of growth targets, and if you don't, you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
Um, on the other side, if
And growth
you,
targets within usually an 18 to 24-month
yeah,
period.
yeah, exactly, very, very aggressive growth targets, and the legal tech market may not allow for that.
Hmm.
It's, you know, it is a little different. It's a little harder. It's not as developed of a market as, say, like, I don't know, analytics or marketing or something like that.
Right.
Um, but on the other side, I think, you know, there are many months that I was not able to write myself a paycheck. You know, being self-funded, and that's also really tough. So, you know, there are drawbacks to either one. I'm incredibly privileged that I was able to weather that storm and come out of it without too much trouble. But, you know, at this point, I'm doing consultant work on the side
Mhm.
to pay for my startup habit, essentially. Yeah,
Diego Alcala in the chat says, "Tell Dan I'm a huge fan." I don't know if you know
awesome.
Diego. Diego.
Yeah, likewise, Diego. I also am a huge fan of yours, and I also have a question for you, Diego.
And
I thought we were going to do.
he's got one for you as well. Yeah, but he said, "Let me get his," and then you. Well, go ahead. What's your question for Diego?
Well, so we've got to reschedule the Legal Tech conference in Puerto Rico, but that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, we need to reschedule that, Diego. I'm still waiting for that because Daddy needs a vacation here. He needs to reschedule. He says, uh, and he says it's going down. So that's good to
Awesome.
hear. He says this is a beautiful project, your investigative journalist project. We wanted to do something for a local investigative group between party donations, contracts, and licenses provided with the Department of State and company information. Would the methodology that LegalRobot has, uh, would that work with Spanish language data?
Yes, absolutely. And one of the things we were looking at, obviously, with Puerto Rico, um, we wanted to we wanted to pull in. It's really nice for us analyzing that kind of data because Puerto Rico is, you know, U.S. law, but Spanish language,
Mm-hmm.
and so we're already sort of calibrated to U.S. law, but we need to go and build a Spanish language model. So Spanish or the Puerto Rican sort of system of contracts and all that, um, that would be ideal for us. To that end, we've worked with some journalists down there already, and that's the first place that we're going to go after after we get the U.S. model up and running. We hope to go from there to all LATAM countries,
Mm-hmm.
and because that's so. I think Spanish is the second most spoken language in the world. Um, but yeah, Diego was mentioning post Maria data. One of the reasons that Puerto Rico attracted our attention is there was this awful contract from was it Whitefish Energy,
Yes, I
and
remember the
oh
whitefish
my
story.
god, those assholes. Anyway, um, so that caught our attention. It was this two-person outfit that got this totally ridiculous contract with audit proofing clauses and things like that. And our
And this
goal
was
is
for
to
getting the electricity back up and running, correct?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And what we want to do is help local investigative journalists find those contracts without having to read through all of them, and be able to have the underlying documents to go and run with that story. Again, I don't know how to monetize that, but
Yeah.
it's definitely a cool application of our software.
Well,
Um,
so here's my thought, just off a little bit off the beaten path, is you can't monetize it for the investigative journalists, right? Because you mentioned that you made a promise not to.
right.
But can you monetize it for anybody else besides the so you may think about, as you did with how does a county who's negotiating for a contract, pitching their general counsel or the county administrators city managers, people like that, with this data and sell them this data as a corporate intelligence type of option. Like
Yeah,
I feel like that kind of, so we're not selling it to the investigative journalists, but all the other commercial uses for that, I feel like you could really drive that home for the revenue.
yeah. Well, and actually, Douglas Laughlin also mentioned in the chat window a sort of the one area that we did think about with monetization was essentially the whistleblower. So if you, under the False Claims Act, which is this like Civil War era law, if you find someone that's essentially defrauding the government and you help out with the prosecution and the U.S. Attorney's Office takes it over, or if they decide they don't want to take it on, if you take it to the end, you can actually get part of a partial recovery from that. And you know, when you're talking about a multi-million-dollar fraud, that can be a really significant chunk of revenue. It takes many, many years, and what you're asking for is essentially building a lawsuit, building a business around lawsuits, and that's tough.
That's
I know
tough.
people have done it with litigation finance and things like that. I'm not a lawyer,
Sure.
so that's not my natural sort of tendency, but that is one area that we thought about.
What
And
if you, I mean, certainly the best thing, and it's funny that you brought up these terrible contracting blunders, because I've been thinking as stimulus package after stimulus package is passed right now. I was talking to a buddy today to, hey, keep your ears open, and if there's something that we're able to service, they're going to need private sector people to help with these things right now who have certain areas of expertise. And
yeah,
I'm wondering if potentially you can be selling this, because the government contract is like winning the golden ticket for Willy Wonka, right? I mean, it's a great
yeah,
thing. But what if you pitched this to auditors and uh, the internal investigations departments, state investigative agencies who do
hmm
the auditing? That seems like this type of thing would be really good for that type of an organization. If you can get a contract with even California, it would be
yeah,
fantastic.
yeah. Pre-acquisition, you know, risk analysis,
Yeah.
see if there's any sort of hidden issues. Uh, not to drag anyone in legal tech into this, but the company Autonomy that got acquired by HP, theoretically, you'd see some of these kind of self-reinforcing, um, sort of self-dealing, I suppose, not self-reinforcing.
Right.
These self-dealing kind of rings in those contracts. That guy that ended up making several $billions off of that autonomy thing is now a legal tech funder and VC. So I have to choose my words carefully here.
Choose them carefully. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, and Diego's saying, the subscription service. I think there is a subscription service to be had there, but for whom exactly? I was thinking if you got it with those who are constantly reviewing government contracts for
Mm-hmm.
internal audits, that would be excellent. He said malpractice, collections cases. I think that just like the whistleblower, I think the class action thing is is a potential. And I'm thinking for those big class action firms who actually search out these types of things, this
Mm-hmm.
could be a really, okay, enterprise level subscription for you guys if this is what you do.
Yeah. So
Inspectors general. That, thank you, Douglas. That's the
mhm.
term I was looking for. The inspectors general, or who I was thinking of.
Yeah. So one of the really exciting things is we've got all this data. We've got a ton of things that we could do with it. And being such a small team, we're never going to be able to do anything, do all of those things with it. And that's one of the ideas behind handing this off to academics for free. So, for example, we're we've talked to the ICIJ, which is the um, International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and over at Stanford, they run a lot of their operations out of there. And yeah, like Diego mentions, they were the ones that put together the Panama Papers team. So yeah, we'll be giving the data set to them to combine with all of their other kind of things. So that's, there's a lot of opportunity. Basically, there's a lot of low-level grift in the US and in other countries, and we can now use computational scale to get rid of some of that. I don't know how to monetize that perfectly, but certainly there's some good to be done, and we'll find the business model, and the consulting thing will keep us afloat until we do that.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's funny when you mention low-level grift. Is I actually, when I came out of college and in law school, and my first job was with the county, and I was hired after they fired a bunch of people for this low-level grift and prosecuted a bunch of people for, these are public guardians, so they're actually taking care of money of those who can't take care of it themselves. And what they would play, the game they would play was, well, I don't share the same last name as my brother because I've got my married name, and I'll pay my brother $400 a month to go mow this lawn of this lady, her money, for, which is like a 4 foot by 5 foot thing a lot, and that's the kind of stuff that you're talking about. And it was just blatant the way they were abusing this. And then that, now bro kicks me back a couple $100 for that. And so very, very low level grift, but you can do a lot of damage to a lot of people with that. And it's no good, because corruption actually it makes people less trusting of the government agencies who are now supposed to be taking care of them.
Yeah. It's also just a dick move.
It's such a dick move. It really is. That's what it comes down to. So what are we going to see from LegalRobot, say, in the next year? I think I asked you this 5 years ago. But what do we think we'll see this time? And then in 5 years, you'll come back and tell me what the difference.
I better be back before then.
You're going to come back before then.
Yeah. Well, I think you'll see certainly the work that we'll be publishing along with the Knight Foundation, as well as some academic papers that detail some of our methods on that. I think that's going to be pretty useful for a lot of folks as we push out those data sets, and hopefully other folks in the legal tech community find some value in that. We may, if people use that data to make a commercial product, we may figure out some sort of like revenue share or something, I don't know, a very, very tiny percent, just so that we are able to share in some of that, some of the profit from that, but not, to the point where it's a barrier to creating something. So yeah.
Yeah, you are one of the few people, Dan, that I can't say few. That's not true anymore. There are a lot of people pushing for the access to justice issue, but you've really got the cape on, and I believe you've got the LegalRobot cape on right now.
Yes,
there it is. There it is. But there are a lot more now. A lot more people are focused on this. Doing good seems to be what you're most interested in. I'd like to do some good.
Yeah, well, and to that end, a few months ago, I started the Legal Tech Foundation, which is, it's basically what we want to be the first, essentially the first organization that provides legal advice via algorithm. But we want to do it in a way that's free and available to all people. So we expect to launch that in California and Utah when the regulatory sandboxes or whatever comes about. Utah is going forward with their sandbox, and hopefully, I know Johan's got some thoughts on this, but hopefully the California trustees will go forward with their sandbox as well.
And I mean, we have a few minutes here, and I know Johan is also, he does have thoughts. You guys can actually share your thoughts now on from the ATIL's experience, right? I mean, you guys
Yeah.
you're done, and now you can openly discuss your experience.
Yes. Yeah. We're unshackled, unchained, and so on. Well, and we can actually like tweet at each other now. We
Right.
couldn't before. Super annoying with the public meetings laws.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I have some thoughts. I am really disappointed that the trustees kicked the can down the road at their last meeting for the California sandbox.
Regulatory sandbox.
Regulatory sandbox, yeah. That we've seen in this current crisis just how fast things can change, and the reality is that people that are living through the access to justice crisis, that's that's what they're dealing with all the time, and so to delay that potential fix for yet another 2 months, it is going to be devastating to people. We're hearing from the trustees that 80 some odd percent of people not having access to a lawyer when they're getting their children taken away, or when they're getting evicted, or when they're getting harassed at work, or whatever is going on, and they can't find a lawyer. We're hearing from the trustees that they're okay with that, and that really bothers me. That is offensive on a really deep level, and really frustrates me. So I will be speaking out against that. I do think what we put together for the trustees, for them to consider, I think it's a really good proposal. I don't agree with all of it, but I agree with so many things in there that I did vote yes on every single proposal. I think collectively it's a really good thing and should lead the way forward in regulation throughout the US. But I think this 2 month delay that they've handed us, and the uncertainty around that, I think that's really harmful, and I'm
And we
pissed.
know that that 2 month delay is probably going to be longer now.
Yeah, yeah,
It's seeming just by natural cause, or that we're going to be, anything that's been pushed out 2 months is likely to be pushed out much longer at this point.
yeah,
I should note for everybody that we are, for future listeners, audio listeners only, this is March 19th of 2020, so we are in full swing of coronavirus 2020, or COVID-19 2020, which is
yeah,
so if you reflect on this later on the replay or anything like that, we're expecting delays in lots of stuff right now. It was funny, just yesterday I saw a news headline. I don't know that it's been pushed through, but I saw that essentially they've opened up all the borders for doctors to practice in any of the 50 states right now. And
yep,
I thought, look how quickly that happened.
yeah,
Whereas lawyers are usually jurisdictionally restricted to, okay, I took the bar and passed it in California, I took it in Texas, I'm licensed there. I mean, that kind of urgent matter should be able to be addressed very quickly in a crisis and solve some, not all, because we know that not all not all the issues that people are dealing with legal services can be solved by pro bono hours, but it certainly would be nice to see that kind of quick reform, allowing for something like that in an emergency.
Yeah, well, we've seen a little bit of that
Have we?
in some previous disasters, not to the scale. So I remember back when it was like Hurricane Harvey hit Texas.
Mm-hmm.
The Texas State Bar opened it up for anyone that was doing. Oh, I don't know what the specifics were, but anyway, they opened it up to outside lawyers, and
Okay.
basically any U.S. licensed lawyer could come in and help folks. And that was a big thing. I've seen that a couple other times since then. I don't remember which disasters, but it does happen. It's just the problem is, no matter how many lawyers we have, there will never be enough to meet the demand of
Can't
what
solve it.
people have.
Nope. Can't solve it with only lawyers.
Yeah.
It's I would like to see, just for the lawyer's sake, though, that if you're admitted into one jurisdiction, you're admitted into all, because
Yes.
it really restricts your ability to move around. And a lot of
Mhm.
people are mobile these days and moving around. So I certainly would like to see that, just that restriction be lifted. I get that there's problems, but um, any last minute recommendations? This is generally, I know that this is a pro founder show. What recommendations could you give to other founders before we wrap up here?
Don't get into contract analytics. Everyone's in it.
Everybody's in it.
No, I mean, like, it's fine, but it's like, um, like I was saying before, we kind of got fixated on some things and didn't get to revenue fast enough. So that's one thing. Um, Go for an area where you really can differentiate yourself. At the time we got into contract analytics, we could differentiate ourselves. There was maybe another 4 companies in the space at that time. Now there's, I don't know, a couple dozen at least,
At least.
um, and they're popping up every day. So it's really hard to differentiate yourself in that space. But the really good news is, law is so big and so complicated, that there's a bunch of places that you could apply technology to and make a really big impact. Um, I personally think that the people law sector is an area where people are not focusing, and there's a huge amount of opportunity. There's what, 7, 8 billion people in the world, and a lot of them don't have access to competent legal counsel. Technology can sometimes fill part of that gap, and that's a whole lot more potential paying customers than you know the 100,000 or so businesses in the U.S. that you might be able to reach, or maybe 1 million businesses in the U.S. It's the market size is dwarfed, but people just are not looking at it. So I would actually look forward to some competition on that side.
Excellent. That's great. And you call it people law.
Yeah,
This is not terminology that I'm familiar. I mean, access to justice, it makes sense, but that's new terminology for me, at least.
yeah.
So
So like, bankruptcy, divorce, the kinds of legal problems that we all
everybody
have
has.
on a
Yeah.
personal level, rather
Right.
than B2B kind of stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah. Interesting. Any questions for Dan before we ramp up tonight? I see we still got Diego Alcala, Johans here, and Douglas Laughlin is still here. So if you got any last minute questions, get them in now. He's got a busy night of coding, I imagine, or is that what the
Yep.
evening? Yep.
Coding in
So,
front of the fire with my wife and my cats.
excellent. Well, it sounds like the perfect kind of lay low kind of evening. So
Exactly.
no Netflix for you tonight, huh?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
No, all right. So if there's any last minute question, can you talk a bit about your tech stack? Oh, there's
Oh,
Doug.
yeah. I'd love to.
Doug Laughlin.
I can go into all kinds of detail here. Just stop me when it gets too detailed.
No, that's all right. We got
Um,
a few minutes.
So what we do is, again, we build a whole shit ton of classifiers. We do that in TensorFlow. And one of the sort of guiding principles of the way that we build algorithms is that we want to run them on the client. So we build them on our side using publicly accessible data sets. And thanks, Diego. See you
Thanks,
around.
Diego. See you next week.
So yeah, we build stuff with publicly accessible data sets so we can have data traceability and all that. And then we execute the algorithms in the browser with TensorFlow.js. And we do that so that we can have everything end-to-end encrypted, because I don't ever want to be in the position where I can read someone else's legal document.
Right.
Just the compliance nightmare that is being able to read someone's legal information is just not worth it. So we also get the benefit of using their GPU, so I don't have to pay for as much GPU time. So that's kind of so yeah, TensorFlow for all the algorithms. We use Node and React. So Node to serve up the API and the application. We use GraphQL and React. GraphQL to do the data transmission and structuring and all that. React to render the UI. Let's see what else. TensorFlow runs in Python. So we've also got that running out on the side. It's all orchestrated with Docker. Well, I'm sorry, it's all running in Docker and orchestrated with Kubernetes. So that is our tech stack in a nutshell.
How do you like that, Doug? I do have a question for you that I think some other legal tech founders, it's come up. Do you think selling legal tech for you would have been easier with a lawyer co-founder? Do you think that that would have, this comes up once in a while?
Probably would have, yeah. I mean, there were a lot of things where, like I remember going into a meeting with like Baker McKenzie and making a total fool of myself. And if I had had a lawyer there beside me, they probably would have led that kind of thing. I don't know that it's necessary to be a co-founder, but I think certainly someone who's on the sort of sales kind of pursuit side. I think having those kinds of people on the team early on would be helpful.
Yeah,
And in a small company, maybe that is a co-founder. Who knows? But certainly someone early on that has that skill.
It does seem that the selling to legal somehow benefits from having somebody legal communicating with the lawyers. I think,
Yeah.
I don't know if that's well, I think it's an ego thing. I think it's a snobbish kind of thing. From the lawyer standpoint, in my experience, it's I want to hear from somebody who speaks like me, kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and that's also part of the, they want to see that you're in the cool kids club. It's part of the, erection of barriers.
Yeah.
So yeah, that may be, but I see it as just someone to make sure you don't make an ass of yourself.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, I think that's fair, just knowing how a certain industry operates. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, I want to thank you, Dan, for being here with me tonight. I'm sorry it took us so long to get. So let me back up. I'm going to apologize that it took me so long to get him back, but I do want everybody to know that I said, Dan, let me know when you want to come back. Did I say that every time I saw you in person?
Yeah, like at least a half a dozen times.
So I kept offering, and then I never heard from him. Finally, I was like, all right, when are you coming back? So,
Yeah.
But thank you, Dan Rubins of LegalRobot and Slalom Build. Is that your consulting side?
Yes, that is. I'm part of Slalom Consulting, part of the Build organization over there. It is a fantastic company. Honestly, it's been I've only been working with them for a while, but It is a masterclass in how to build the culture of a company, and it's just a pleasure to work there.
That's awesome. That's great. And tell people how they can get in touch with you, Dan.
Yeah, so I've now got like half a dozen work emails, which is fun. Get to check all of those all the time. So
Right.
you can reach me at dan@legaltechfoundation.org, dan@legalrobot.com, dan.rubins@sloan.com, and oh God, there's a bunch more.
You can
Anyway,
catch him. You can easily catch him at Dan Rubins on
on
Twitter.
Twitter for sure. Yes,
Yeah, that's a
that's
good one.
probably the fastest way because it's just too many emails, man.
There's so many emails. I just tell people. Of course, I've got two Twitter handles. I've got the
Yeah,
professional one and the personal one. So that gets. But usually, you can get me on a Twitter handle far sooner than you can get me anywhere else because there's just too many emails. So that is Dan Rubins of LegalRobot. Thanks again, Dan, for being here. This episode will be on the website next Tuesday. And stay tuned for episode 80. We're going to have Chris Brown of Contract Canvas, not contract analytics. This is something different. But contract canvas next week, we will be doing it from who knows where in the pandemically challenged US of A.
yeah.
Thank you again, Dan, and don't disappear when we stop recording.
Thanks so much.